are in the middle of this, the burden of Babylon. And we've gone through chapter 13. We finished up chapter 13, and I'm trying to show that this mystical Babylon, this figurative Babylon, isn't really talking about literal Babylon in 539 BC. And a lot of writers, a lot of people that really get into it and study it, they're like, yeah, pretty much out of chapter 13, only verse 17 actually happens. All the rest of it doesn't happen to literal Babylon. And so they say this is a mystical Babylon. I say a figurative Babylon, or really the way you need to be thinking about it is what Isaiah's been doing the whole time, the antitype Babylon. The one that follows after the pattern of the original Babylon. That's the way I like to teach it. That's the way I see Isaiah. You see the type, antitype the whole time. Isaiah was given the nickname by who I don't know, and when I don't know, the Messianic prophet. Isaiah is considered the fifth gospel. He is concerned, ultimately, primarily concerned with events during the time of the Messiah. I did not give him those nicknames. This is not me coming up with some new theory. Now, matching it to Jerusalem, I don't know how many people do that. I haven't gone and studied a ton of other people's stuff. But what we've done in 13 is we've lined up every single verse and says, does that apply to when Rome destroyed Jerusalem in the first century? Because Jerusalem, Judah and Jerusalem, this whole book is the warning to them. Verse 1, Isaiah, son of Amoz, wrote concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And he starts off right away, Hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth. I'm going to make you desolate. I'm going to destroy you. You're going to get your big punishment. And the whole book is kind of that. And it's what I said at the beginning. It's about the transition from Judaism to Christianity. The Messianic times. And you will see, again, I've said this is probably my 10th time to say this, you will see in the second half a whole lot of the Gentiles were going to be a part of the kingdom. Christ was going to be a light unto the Gentiles. The strangers from afar would come near. They would be adopted and put under the tent. It's just over and over a whole bunch of different ways that Isaiah can say the Gentiles are going to be God's people. They are eventually going to be God's people. They're going to be in on this deal. So, Isaiah 13 starts the burdens. Isaiah 13 starts this, 13 and 14 is the burden of Babylon. It doesn't happen to literal Babylon. It is mystical Babylon or figurative Babylon. What's going on back there? I see everybody laughing. Did you break a chair?
No. That chair broke me.
I've sat in that chair before. I don't do it anymore.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's probably back there. Somebody didn't want it.
It needs to be thrown away. It's bad.
Okay.
I'm fine.
I'm surprised they here.
Yeah, there was one.
So now we're moving into chapter 14. And what you see here, what I've done is I've said, okay, don't just take my word for it. I want you to see what a whole bunch of very well-respected biblical scholars, guys that have written big fat commentaries, I think most of them have been dead for a very long time. I want you to see what they say about 14:1 and 14:2. Because 13 and 14 is not about literal Babylon. Well, what is it about? And we've gone through all the clues. Peter is the apostle to the Jews. Peter was an elder at the church of Babylon. He was always in Jerusalem. Babylon is Jerusalem. And so I make the connection that all of 13, all of 14 is really ultimately talking about first century Jerusalem. That's what I say this Babylon is, metaphorically, figuratively. A lot of the other scholars say It's not real Babylon, it's not literal Babylon, but we don't know who it is. It's just representative of some other city, some other nation. But they don't take the next step. However, in these two verses, they do. And they say the exact same thing I say. It's a first century event. It's Isaiah being the Messianic prophet. It's the fifth gospel. He is dealing with the first century. So let me read 14:1. For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel, because we've been talking about them being in the burden of Babylon, Babylon getting destroyed, but he's going to save his people during this burden of Babylon. And yet will choose Israel and set them in their own land. They're going to come out of this captivity, and they're going to get to be in their own land. All right, now I say that's figurative. The type is literal, but the antitype is figurative. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. That's very important, because that's Gentiles, strangers, joining God's people. You have a little bit of a fulfillment here in Esther, literal fulfillment. So again, parts of the type will be fulfilled, even if not that much of it is. You occasionally get an overlap where they both are fulfilled. But what I'm saying, before I read all these commentaries, is that this is really talking about Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 11. And I want to read that again real quick, because I want you to see how, when you read it out loud, tab went away. I can't find any book without the tabs. Starting in verse 11, wherefore remember that ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, and he's talking to the people in Ephesus, which is, it's marked on the map, so it's right here. So this is Gentile land. He's talking to the Christians at Ephesus. Ye being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision, by that which is called circumcision. So the Jews called the Gentiles the uncircumcision. That at that time ye were without Christ. You were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. You were strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, whom ye sometimes were afar off, are made nigh by the blood of Christ. And we're going to get this Gentiles afar off in the chapter in the 60s a lot of Isaiah. For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to making himself of twain one new man, and that he might reconcile both unto God in one body by the cross, having slain the enmity thereof, and came and preached peace to you which were afar off, and to them that were nigh, the Gentiles and the Jews. The strangers were going to be in the Christian kingdom, the kingdom of Christ, the church of the firstborn. For through him we both have access by one Spirit unto the Father. And now this is 19. Now therefore ye are no more strangers or foreigners or sojourners, but fellow citizens with the saints and the household of God. That sounds a whole lot like Isaiah 14:1. And are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom all the building fitly framed together groweth unto a holy temple in the Lord. We are that holy temple, the church, the souls. So it's a house not made with hands. It's a spiritual temple made up of Jews and Gentiles, in whom ye also are builded together for an habitation of God through the Spirit. The strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. Now, I'm not the only one that says that. When you go on the Bible Hub, everybody says that. Everybody says this verse is not talking about Esther. It's talking about Christ in the first century. They're saying Isaiah is the Messianic prophet. They're saying Isaiah is the fifth gospel. They're saying this is about the first century. You go to verse 2, same thing. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids. They shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. That doesn't really happen with the leaving of literal Babylon. It doesn't happen. It's not fulfilled. This is not literal. Verse 1 kind of applies. Kind of. I would say that it halfway applies to Babylon 539 BC. Verse 2 doesn't apply at all to Babylon 539 BC. They don't leave right away. It takes them a generation or more to leave. You got the timeline on that there. They leave in the 400s to start going back and rebuilding the temple. Isn't it like 458 or anybody got the dates on that stuff? I used to know them, but I've forgotten. But anyway, they don't leave right away, and they're certainly not going to take a whole lot of Babylonian people captive. What it's talking about is this figurative, spiritual rule over them. Christianity was going to conquer all. And the best example that I can think of is Saul. He was persecuting them, he was oppressing them, and then this transition happened. They switch over to Christianity, and now all of a sudden Paul is ruled by Christ. He's ruled by Christianity, and he becomes the best warrior we had in the Christian church. Okay? I'm not the only one that says that. Right? This is not me just coming up with a metaphor that's just out of thin air. All of these guys have it. Point at those times under the gospel. Pool, in the days of the gospel, they conquered a great part of the Gentile world to the obedience of the Messiah. Fulfilled in the times of the gospel. These are all the really smart guys with all the commentaries. Geneva, brought under the service of Christ. Paul was brought under the service of Christ. Isaiah is the Messianic prophet. Your mind should go there first. Now, if you some of the stuff that we've already covered, yeah, some of the Assyria stuff, some of the Ahaz stuff, that the reason and Pekah, all of that was literal, and that happened back then. That happened in the 8th century, 7th century BC. But most of it, the focus is on the 1st century AD. 14, everybody points to 14, the beginning of it at least, being fulfilled during the times of the Messiah. What captivity, what figurative antitype captivity are they coming out of? What persecution are they coming out of there in the 1st century? And Saul was consenting unto his death. And at that time, there was a great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem. That's what it's talking about. Jerusalem had turned into Babylon. They were the ones being oppressive to God's people. And you could go read the end of Daniel, not the end of Daniel, but kind of the middle end of Daniel. I guess that's really in the middle. About when Belshazzar is, like, he brings out all the temple cups and plates and everything, he's having this big party, and he's being real mean to him and everything, and then the writing on the wall happens. Y'all should remember all of that. 14:3, and I want to go back and redo this slide, so I'm going to edit it a little bit when I put it in. But I always want the in that day to be in green, so that you're triggered to think during the times of Christ. I have yet to find an in that day. I'm not saying every single case in the Bible means that it's talking about the Messianic times, but that's the first place I look when I see that in that day. And it goes along with the previous two verses. This verse 3 that we've not covered yet, is joined with the previous two verses. All of these scholars, they don't make the connection. They just do 14:1 and 14:2 and then they stop. But you can't do that. It's all chapter 13 and all chapter 14 are about the exact same topic. You can't just pick one or two verses and make it about this time period and then this other verse about it. It's one topic. Take out the chapter break. And it shall come to pass in that day. When? When the Gentiles would be joined to the church. What was the... When the Gentiles were joined to the church and the oppressors started being ruled over. Christianity ruled over them. During that time, when this transition is completed, that great persecution of Acts 8, chapter 8, verse 1, they were eventually going to get the reprieve from it. They couldn't get it right away. They had to go through it. God had to have this dramatic flare. He had to have the whole world see that his people could overcome something that they should not have been able to overcome. He has to have that dramatic flare. And it shall come to pass in that day, in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. Yeah, it applies to Babylon 539 BC when they come out of that bondage, but it also applies to coming out of that Jewish persecution. That Jewish persecution that had been going on for a while, decades, and then you throw in the Nero persecution on top of it right at the very end of it. They would get that reprieve from it. When would they get it? When they're going through, kind of at the end of this transition from Judaism to Christianity. Turn to Isaiah chapter 65. I don't like referring to later in Isaiah, but this is a key part because you're also going to see this exact same verbiage in the book of Revelation. And this class is on how to study Revelation. '65, start at verse 2. I have spread out my hands all the day unto a rebellious people. Who's he talking about? Who are the rebellious people? The Jews. Right? Which walketh in a way that was not good after their own thoughts, the people that provoked me to anger continually to my face. With sacrifices, they do all this heathen stuff. Go down to verse 7. Your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together, saith the Lord, which have burned incense upon the mountains and blasphemed me upon the hill. Therefore will I measure their former work in their bosom. Verse 8. As the new wine is found in the cluster, as one saith, destroy it not, for a blessing is in it. So will I do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. What's he talking about?
The remnant.
The remnant. We're the remnant. The Christians. Paul talks about it. He says, hey, remember that remnant that Isaiah was talking about? That's us. We are the remnant. I will bring forth a seed out of Jacob and out of Judah, an inheritor of my mountain. This should be triggering everything in your head. Everything we've been going over, and it should make a lot of sense for you. Whereas if you just read this verse by itself before you were in this class, maybe you're like, I don't know what that means. The inheritor out of my mountains, my elect shall inherit, and my servants shall dwell therein. And Sharon shall be a fold of flocks in the valley of Achor, a place for herds to lie down in, for my people have sought me. He's talking about the transition to Christianity. The remnant would inherit. The kingdom was going to, Matthew 21, 23, where is it? 21. The kingdom was going to be taken away from the scribes and Pharisees. And the chief priest They are like, I think he's talking about us, taking the kingdom away from us and giving it to the Gentiles. It's all saying the same thing. It's all over the Bible. You cannot miss it. Therefore, verse 12, therefore will I number you to the sword, and ye shall all bow down to the slaughter. You did not answer, you did not hear, you kept doing evil. 14, behold, my servant shall sing for joy of heart, but ye shall cry for sorrow of heart, and shall howl for vexation of spirit. And there's New Testament cross references on almost every one of these verses. Verse 15, and ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen, for the Lord God shall slay thee, and call his servants by another name. Is there any question on what that other name is? Christian, if you weren't sure. They're transitioning from Judaism to Christianity. Keep it in context. Hey, I'm going to destroy it. I've been dealing with these Jews. They've been very difficult. I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to send them to the sword. We're going to leave that name. You remnant, my chosen, that part of the cluster that I'm not going to destroy, you're going to be called by a new name. And they were first called Christians at Antioch. Verse 17, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. Do we need to go over that anymore? No, we do not. For the former shall not be remembered, nor come into mind. Be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy my people. And the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. And then verse 20 is the no more death. When the Gentiles would be joined to the church. This is a first century prophecy. Isaiah 65 is a first century prophecy. Guess where else you read those exact same words?
Revelation.
Revelation 21 verse 4. He's not talking about there will be no more pain, no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying all time. He's saying from this great persecution that you've been going through. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Judaism was passing away. The heavens and earth, the leaders and people of Judaism were passing away, so that that which cannot be shaken could remain, so that Christianity could take its place here on earth. Isaiah is the Messianic prophet. And in that day, in the day of Christ, in the times of the Messiah, that is when these things are going to be fulfilled. Then you get into the king of Babylon. We're not changing. We're still dealing with Babylon here. So the leader of this mystical Babylon. If we're saying mystical Babylon is first century Jerusalem, who is the king of Babylon, this mystical Babylon? Who was the king of the Jews back then? First century. The Herods. Okay? Your jaw will hit the floor once you see how when they start describing this, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's copy and paste. Acts chapter 12. That's Herod. That's Herod all the way. It's shocking how similar the king of Babylon and the Herods are to each other. It just keeps on going with what we're saying. It's the Messianic prophet. He's talking about this figurative Babylon. Now he's going to be talking about the king, the type, the pattern, the forerunner is the king of Babylon. The ultimate target is the Herods.
Isn't that the reason Herod killed all the young boys at the birth of Christ? He thought it was going to be an earthly.
Thought it was going to be an earthly kingdom.
Yeah.
And you can't really blame him for that.
No, he was just looking out for himself.
You blame me for that part of it.
I guess he
But
was.
even the apostles at first were looking for an earthly kingdom. And they had to be corrected on it. No. My kingdom is not of this world. Okay, if I wanted it to be of this world, this would not be an issue. I'd bring down all my angels, we'd kill everybody, we'd win easy. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm trying to win people's souls. I'm trying to win their hearts, their minds over to Christianity. And God gives us free will, so he doesn't make us. He allows us to choose. It's a very anti-Calvinistic phrase that I just said. Augustine of Hippo in the early 400s, late 300s, early 400s, he's the one that started fighting against free will. That was his big thing with Pelagius. If any of y'all were in my class upstairs on that. That's a really, really fun study to get into, because when you really dig into that, you spend a few days of hard digging, you'll be like, whoa, this is how Catholicism starts. This is really how, and Augustine of Hippo is like the Catholics' number one, not Pope guy. Number one saint, number one whatever. They all look back to him and revere him. And it cracks me up because one of his most famous sayings, well documented, well recorded, Christ is the rock that the church is built on, not Peter. Which is the most anti-Catholic thing you can say. Right?
Yeah.
Augustine says that. But that's before the popes. So of course he would say that. The popes don't come around until like the late 500s or something. (14:4), the oppressor in his golden city ceased. His rule was going to be taken away from him. That happens to literal Babylon, Belshazzar. He loses his city. The city is not destroyed, but he loses his rule over it. Herods, they lose their rule, and the city is destroyed. The golden city ceased. 14:5, the scepter. The staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. Their kingdom was going to be taken away from them. Therefore I say unto you, this is Matthew. Therefore I say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you and given to a nation bringing forth fruits thereof. And when the chief priests and Pharisees had heard the parable, they perceived that he spake of them. This passage is so important. It explains most of the book of Isaiah. Hey, what sum this up? Transition from Judaism to Christianity. That's what this verse is saying. And that's what my class is about. That's what I think Revelation is about. That's what I think Matthew is about. That's what I think pretty much the whole Bible is about. They set them up, and then they immediately started trying to get them ready for the transition to Christianity. Christ and the church. I don't see 66 books anymore. I used to. Oh, that book is so much different from that one. No, I think they all say exactly the same thing. Might be oversimplifying it a little bit, but he who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. The Jews were the great persecutor of the Christians. Acts 8:1 we've read a dozen times. Acts chapter 12 we're going to get into here in a minute, heavily. Saul. You've got plenty of examples. They would eventually get their reward. They would either convert over to the Christianity like Saul did, or they would be destroyed in this great destruction of Jerusalem 70 AD by the Romans. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And Matthew 24 is talking about the end of the Jewish age when the temple would be destroyed. Do not use the King James in that chapter. He says, hey, tell us when these things are going to happen and the end of the world. That is a mistranslation. It is a very bad mistranslation. I love the King James, not in that one verse. That word means age, not world. Cosmos is world, I think it's Aeon or Eon or something like that. That means the age of Judaism. And remember in Matthew 24, Roy, you remember, they're told, don't come back into your house to get stuff. When this happens, when you see these signs, when you see Jerusalem encompassed by the Roman army, don't come back into your house. Pray that your flight be not in winter. Pray that you don't have child. Pray that it's not on the Sabbath. Why? Because the city gates would be closed and they couldn't get out. They couldn't escape this Roman army. Roman army was about to set up this siege. You need to get out before that siege was set up. That's what I was talking about. Matthew chapter 24. And that destruction of Jerusalem is kind of the completion of the transition. Think about the wilderness wandering. They come up out of the Red Sea here. Who knows where it is? They wander around, and they come up here and cross the Jordan, attack Jericho. How many years from when they cross this place to they cross this place?
40.
40. So they went through a transition from patriarchal to Mosaical for 40 years. When was Christ killed? When do I say Christ was killed? 30 AD. And then they went through this transition for 40 years. From the Mosaical to the Christian. It's even referenced in, I think, 1 Corinthians 10. Hey, remember how when they were going through their transition? We are also now going through the transition, just like they were. I think that's 1 Corinthians 10. Might be 12, somewhere in there. 40-year transition between covenant the first time, 40-year transition between covenants the second time. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. This is what we covered a little bit last time. And we'll cover it in a lot more depth next in the second half of the class next year, or in the fall. They break forth into singing. Yea, the firs rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller, I think that means nobody to chop us, is come up against us. Not that old feller.
Fellas.
Not like old. It's not old person talk.
Yeah.
I think it means a person felling the trees.
No, that'd be fella.
Fella?
Is an old guy. Feller.
No, my dad would say feller.
Feller?
I don't know.
It sounds like there's an A in there.
That old fella.
Maybe.
The NIV says woodsman.
There you go. So that's right.
Salt.
A chopper.
Yeah.
My dad would say, "Boy, come here, bust your butt."
Yeah.
Heard that too many times.
Oh, man.
So Christianity is going to be at rest. Nobody is going to come. And what is this? Think about it literal for a second. Thinking literal is wrong. Why do we care if fir trees are happy? Or, better question is, can fir trees be happy? No. Fir trees are what made up the temple. Now, the firs and the cedars of Lebanon. Now, therefore, command that thou that they hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon. So he built the house and finished it and covered the house with beams and boards of cedar. They got their wood from up here, okay, to build the temple down here. That's the type. That's the Old Testament physical version. We are the fir, the cedar, the box, the oak, the shittim tree. There you have, when you get into the 40s, if you want to go look it up and read it, it talks about all of these different types of trees would now build the temple. They're not rebuilding a physical temple. That's us. That's the people. That's the family lines. That's the individuals. We are what are fitly framed together to build the temple. Now, therefore, ye are no more strangers and foreigners but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. Christ is not a literal rock on the corner of a building. Spiritually and metaphorically, he is. Physically and literally, he is not. In all whom the building fitly framed together groweth unto a holy temple in the Lord. The cedars, the firs, those are the Jews. All of these other ones that Isaiah will talk about later, those are the Gentiles. And it's weird to add all of those other types of trees in to build the temple. It was a weird thing to them. All of this Gentiles coming into the kingdom and the church and everything Jewish was really weird for the Jews. They were holier than thou. They were elitist. They were selective. Sometimes they were commanded to be that way. Remember, all the marriages wasn't entirely their fault. They had to keep separate. This applies to the first century. This is the building of the New Testament church and it being at peace from all of these persecuting forces when it was at its infancy, when it was at the world's worst persecution ever, when it was going through that transition. Now, that doesn't mean the church never faced another persecution. It has throughout time, but not like Matthew 24 says, Matthew 24:21. This is the worst ever. There will never be another one like this. Not before, not after. That's what it's talking about. They were going to get no more death, no more pain, no more sorrow. The church was going to be, yes, nobody can chop us down now. Hades from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth, and is raised up from their thrones, all the kings of the nation. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because this can apply to tons of different societies, tons of different people. I liken that to the bad cop, the dirty, crooked cop, getting thrown in jail with all the people that he threw in jail. So all the people that the Jews had killed over the 1500 years that were bad, they were now going to the same place, the place of the dead with them. And they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as thee? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave. The noise of thy vials, the worm is spread under thee. Israel, the descendants of Jacob, the descendants of Abraham, who number the stars, that nation protected by God, whom all these other nations could never fully, completely conquer, they are finally going to be destroyed. They are finally going to end. They are not going to have God's protection anymore. And who was full of some first century pomp? Acts 25:23. Because remember, we're talking about, they're going to be talking trash to the king of Babylon. So who's full of pomp? Oh, look, it's Herod. And on the morrow, when Herod, Agrippa, was come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and there's another one in Acts 12 that we'll see. And he was entered into the place of hearing, the chief captains and the principal men of the day. At Festus' command, Paul was brought forth. It's the Herods. It fits. And they're going to be brought down into the grave. You can't use 9, 10, 11. You can't use these as proofs. It's not going to lock down onto any one society. Because it makes sense for pretty much every evil ruler in the past. You can say it about Hitler. You can say it about Stalin, Mussolini. You say it about, who knows, bad English kings. Those guys were all pretty bad. Isaiah 5, we know, is talking about Jerusalem. It's pretty direct. It's not very metaphorical that early on. Therefore, Hades hath enlarged herself. He's talking directly to Judah and Jerusalem here. There's no metaphor. There's no burden of Babylon, Edom, Sodom, nothing like that. He's directly talking to the Jews. It sounds exactly like this verse. Therefore, Hades, the place of the dead, hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth rejoiceth shall descend into it. It's the same thing. This is the same verse. The Jews and all of their pomp, all of their haughtiness, all of their holier-than-thou elitism, they thought they could not be killed. They thought nothing bad could happen to them. They were going to be put into the grave. They were going to be put into the place of the dead with all the other people that they had done before. And we're not going any further. Questions? We're 10 minutes early. Tom.
I got an interesting thought here.
Okay.
You talked about free will earlier. Here's the interesting genius of the situation. God's got to create a situation where throughout the transition, so the transition period of, because here we are, we're putting together, we're looking at Isaiah and all these passages, and we're stacking them up against the New Testament, and it's like 100 puzzle pieces fit to 100 puzzle pieces, and it's kind of overwhelming.
More
right?
than that.
I mean, it's ridiculous, the number of matchups that happen.
Yeah.
And so this is really interesting. There has to be, like, in order for God's promise, essentially, regarding man, which is man gets to freely choose God or not God, right? That's set very early, Joshua makes references, choose you this day whom you'll serve.
As
As
for
for
me
me,
and my
the Lord.
house.
Or
Yeah.
as for me and my family, will serve the Lord. This kind of promise that's set forward has to be maintained in such a way that whatever God does doesn't overwhelm the balance of that choice for man, not just then, but now. So think about this. It's like super genius, right? It's like he comes up with this plan that makes predictions like 400 or 500 years in advance, lays out these 100 puzzle pieces, these 1,000 puzzle pieces, whatever. It's a perfect match for anyone who's looking at it. It's an overwhelming case for those who choose to believe,
Yeah.
right? But even today, I didn't know any of this stuff before we looked into it. I've been a Christian for like 25 years.
Yeah.
This is it's almost maddening to watch this unfold in front, where it's like the case is overwhelming, but it's also hidden, and it's a perfect balance, and it's genius.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let Tom know, do you remember when I said that exact same thing
Yes.
to you?
Yes.
I said, and I've been a Christian longer than you, Tom. But it's just stuff we really, or I didn't, I should say my church, where I went back 10 years ago, we did not really study the old prophets like we're doing right now. And it ties it all together, but I never got any of this growing up.
We had, my brother and I talk about this pizza place in Hutto, where my brother and I would go to work on this. Why we chose the pizza place? Probably because we were terrible eaters and we ate a whole bunch of pizza while we were working on this. And we would go there a whole bunch and work on it. And I want to say this was 2008 because I think the Olympics were going on while we were there watching it. Might have been 2004, but whatever. And we were working, and we weren't as into it. We didn't know what we know now, obviously. You learn more every day. And we came to this, we started branching out from Revelation in Matthew 24, and we started going to other places, and after like a day or two of our super hardcore studies in that pizza place, it was like a light bulb had went off in our heads, and we audibly started laughing at ourselves. How dumb are we? It is amazing how God has woven this over thousands of years, and it's perfect, and it's taken dumb Court and dumb Ernie tons and tons and tons of hard work to connect one little thing. We were laughing at how smart God was. You're told all the time he's omniscient and all that stuff, but when a light bulb goes off in your head and you see the beauty of the interweaving of the millennia of writing from all these different writers, we just started laughing. We thought it was funny how much we did not know and how much there was to learn. And we're still learning to this day. Ernie sent me a text earlier and he was, oh, I just found out this about the Herods and this and this. And I was like, what's that even mean? He's like, I'll tell you later. I'm like, okay, good, because I can't put any more in my head today. I got to teach it. Yeah. So. But yeah, you're right. You stumble across it more and more, and maybe by the time we're done with the 60s, maybe by the time we're done with this class, and you see the 60s I mean, you kind of got a taste of it today. You're like, no way. There's no way this is about anything else. That is the Gentiles coming into the church. That is the first century event. It's a Messianic prophet. Anybody else? Cody.
So I have a problem with the translation of Hades,
Oh,
because it's, in my version, it's Sheol.
yeah.
And Sheol is different than Hades.
And in
And
the Hebrew, it's Sheol as well.
And in Hebrew, it's Sheol. And because Hades, to an ancient reader, would be much different than Sheol. Because Hades had different levels, it even had paradise in Hades.
Yeah.
Right? Sheol, though, to the Jews, is a place of deep darkness, but also nothingness. And so, if he's personifying Sheol, like everybody went to Sheol, no matter if you were good, bad, to the Jews back then. So, and it was basically a neutral place that was just dark, nothing, right?
The place
So-
of the dead, right?
Just everybody.
Everybody goes there.
Everybody
Christ went there, right?
supposedly, yes.
Yes.
So, but to the Jews,
But that's not hell.
no. It's
That's-
not. It's
that's a
it's
Gehenna.
It's essentially a holding area
Yeah,
that has to do with nothing.
yeah.
So Isaiah giving it a personification, saying Sheol is going to welcome you, is going to rejoice that you're coming there, and there are maggots and things that will cover you. That would be terrifying to a Jew because,
Wow, okay. I didn't even think
because
of it that way.
it's because it's supposed to be a neutral holding cell, not a place that's like, yes, come here, you are now with us.
Yeah.
So that would be terrifying.
We will eventually get into the Gehenna, hell, Sheol, Hades. I didn't want to focus on it here.
It was bothering.
What is that pit of Tophath or something like that? Oh, we went over it. We talked about it a little bit, but we'll get into it later whenever we come across it. You kind of get the origins of hell. Hell, and I that's a very bad word to use. It's not saying it's a bad word, but the language translations and how exactly what Cody is saying, those words have gotten so twisted coming into English. We use them all pretty wrong, it is my understanding. Okay, but I'll try to say, okay, our understanding of it is this, but this is what it really means. Right back there.
You said earlier Matthew 24, I think, and Revelations 21, Matthew 24, end of the age, Jewish age. Is there a dual there in end of time as far as end of the Jewish age and the end of time coming for Christianity?
I don't believe so.
Comes back?
That's a very, very, very long topic. The short answer, without doing any proofs or showing you why right now, because that would take me forever to answer that question, to show you all of the proofs.
No.
I say no. I believe that 100%, this will shock a lot of people, but a lot of you that know me already know I think this way. I believe that 100% of Revelation has already happened.
Yeah.
And I do believe there will be an end of time. I think in 1 Corinthians 15, I think, 1 Thessalonians 5, I think a couple of those passages deal with the end of time, the end of world, stuff like that. I could be wrong, but that's currently the way I view the end of time. But those are instantaneous things.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I am, but I've kind of always heard Matthew 24 was talking about the end of time when Christ comes back.
That's because of the King James mistranslation of the word world. And that's it. That's the only reason you think that.
Yeah.
That's the only reason anybody ever has thought that. Because that theory didn't exist before that translation, before the King James translation came out.
Good.
Okay? Anything else?
I just have a question. I'm always thinking way off somewhere.
You are.
Compared to the population today, how many people do you think were behind the gates, as they say? You know, are we talking hundreds?
I don't even know what you're asking.
Well,
Which gates?
The gates that were closed on,
The Jewish ones?
yeah. On the first day of the week.
Josephus says there's 1.1 million people in town. Other writers or historians maybe have come back later and say, no, it's only like 600,000 or 700,000, but it was a lot.
That is a lot, you know.
Yeah. I mean, 1 million is a lot in today's time.
Stepping on each other.
Go way back then. Because it was the what was going on when that was the Passover. Everybody was coming into town for the Passover. So the city swelled every Easter, what our Easter is. The city swelled real big, and the Romans were like, yeah, go in. We're about to cut off your food and water. Yeah, y'all go on in. You're going to be overpopulated. That's make it way easier for this siege to work, because you're going to run out of food super fast. And then the zealots burned the food supply. And it was just way worse for them.
And for reference, Fort Worth is at 1 million people.
Yeah, okay.
Put that number of people into that confined, into a city the size of Jerusalem, which Fort Worth is much, much bigger than
Right.
Jerusalem is, or was at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super overcrowdedness. It'd be like to me, it makes me think of when the Olympics, Summer Olympics comes into one of these big major cities. Population just goes boom, and you are walking on streets where you should have just normally been able to walk down. Yeah, that's kind of what I think.